Hello and welcome to the Trust and Influence in B2B podcast. I'm your host, Joel Harrison. Now, employee advocacy has become one of the most talked about tactics in B2B marketing. The premise is simple and compelling. Employees are more trusted than brands. Their personal networks extend reach beyond corporate channels, and their voices carry credibility that advertising simply cannot buy. In an environment of rising media costs, shrinking organic reach, and deepening audience skepticism towards brand content, the case for mobilizing employees as communicators has never seemed stronger. But is the reality living up to the promise or the hype? Today we're going to find out, because we've conducted a rigorous analysis of employee advocacy involvement or integration into the entry into the B2B Marketing Awards 2025. And what the data shows is both encouraging and genuinely challenging for how the discipline currently operates. I'm joined today by Robyn Hartley of Paper Kite Media. Hi, Robyn.
Hello, lovely to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me on.
You're so welcome. Great to have a chance to talk to you in with live forums. And Robyn, I'm going to get Robyn to tell you a bit more about her background later on, but Robyn brings deep expertise into this area, and that's what she's focusing on these days. So we're looking forward to hearing, she's a very well-known face around B2B marketing, very much looking forward to hearing her perspectives on this a little bit later on. So in this episode, we've got a number of things we're hoping to explore with you, using this analysis done on the B2B Marketing Awards entries, and kind of a number of conclusions that we think we're going to try and unpick. So first of all, why LinkedIn dominates employee advocacy and why that can be both a strength and a structural risk. How the most effective campaigns activate employees from the inside out before a single piece of content goes external. Why the most employee advocacy measurement stops at impressions and what rigorous attribution actually looks like or should look like. The uncomfortable question of whether what we're calling the uncomfortable question about whether what we're calling advocacy is actually advocacy at all, and whether the real commercial opportunity for employee advocacy lies, and why that's largely untapped. So if you find this conversation valuable, and I very much hope you do, please subscribe to the podcast, leave a rating or a review, sign up for more. It really helps us and others and other B2B marketers understand what's going on in the show. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. So I'm going to unpack. So Robyn, let's tell us a bit of your details first of all, a bit more about you first of all. So Paper Kite Media is relatively new, but you're making a big splash on social media yourself. You're very visible, aren't you?
I think you're very kind. Thank you for the kind introduction. So to anyone who, if I haven't had the pleasure of meeting you before, my name is Robyn Hartley. I'm managing director for a company called Paper Kite Media, and we specialise specifically in helping B2B teams, B2B leaders create more influence, trust, and ultimately impact across social media. But even further than social media, what does that personal brand and actual expert-led influence, what does that bring to an organisation, and helping set up structured programmes, coaching, workshops and whatnot to help everybody involved. So that's what we specialise in. I absolutely adore the work. I love it. We're in the weeds of it every day. So really looking forward to a productive conversation around it today.
Fantastic, thank you. And you've been in and around B2B for a while, because you were at agency side, other agencies were doing more traditional B2B marketing campaigns, but you've really chosen to specialise in this niche right now, haven't you?
Absolutely, yes. So previously media side, agency side. So full media strategies across multiple different channels for predominantly big tech organisations, this is just an area of that I just really loved, and I saw a huge opportunity for the brands and leaders that we work with now today. And so it's, and again, as you said, there are a lot of challenges around that. What does that look like? How can we help to solve those challenges and bring that all together in a way that is really effective in ultimately building trust with their audiences for our clients? Fantastic,
great stuff. Well, I'm really looking forward to getting your perspective on these things. You and I have talked informally about a lot of this stuff, but it's really great to kind of drill into it. And I didn't actually at that point have this data, which I have now. So before we kind of start I think I've structured this episode to kind of 5 kind of key insights into what's going on in terms of employee advocacy right now, based on, as I say, hundreds of entries into the B2B Marketing Awards. If you're not familiar with the programme, it's been running for 22 years. It's culminates in a very big night in November where lots of B2B marketers are there, behaving mostly badly, but some behave well, and a lot of celebration, networking goes on. But the core of it is a very robust program around hundreds of entries, and a robust judging process involves 150 judges. So I wanted to let's dig into actually the use of it that we can see. The headline numbers found that of the campaign, they say the hundreds of entries into this program, just under 14% of campaign entries included employee advocacy as an explicit mechanic. That's not to say that the campaign was only designed around employee advocacy, but the agency or the client mentioned it in the submission. So we could see that it was actually happening. And so that's roughly 1 in 7. And when you break it down further, only 2.9% deploy as part of the analysis process using AI, obviously. I've kind of deployed what we call employee thought leaders. These are named non-executive, it's very important, non-executive employees whose personal credibility is doing the genuine work in the campaign, right? Because we established there's a bit of a difference between that kind of individual and the other persona which we identify as well. The remaining 10.9% are what we call employee amplifiers. And these are employees who are deployed collectively to extend reach by sharing or reposting content, where the individual's identity is largely irrelevant. So they don't have to be recognised and respected for topic knowledge. They just have to be visible and willing, I suppose. Or you may say there's other characteristics there, but those are certainly two as a starting point, I'd suggest, probably. So there's a lot of noise around advocacy. Lots of platforms built around it, case studies, LinkedIn gurus. Roughly 1 in 7 award entering campaigns are actually using employee advocacy, and the genuine employee thought leadership it's under 3%. Robyn, what do you think about these figures? Well, first of all, do you agree with the definitions that we've kind of come up with there? What do you think about that 1 in 7? Does that sound about right for you in terms of what you're seeing in employee advocacy?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. Because I think it doesn't surprise me at all. I think it's, when you look at award entries, I think it's very difficult to submit a tactic as a whole. It has to be, around a certain campaign, very campaign led. And so employee advocacy, as we use that as a term, is a part of that strategy, that wider strategy that has achieved those outcomes for that particular campaign. So it's very difficult to submit a much more longer cultural behavioural change into an award entry similar to this, but there's probably ways in which it's probably being amplified by the team and the experts that work on the team, but it's actually just not being even named as a tactic because it's not planned strategically as part of that mix. And I think that also comes back to, when you think about social media, particularly organic side, it hasn't really been strategically prioritized for a number of years. And it's only really in the last, I would say probably last 2 to 3 years, really, that it's been taken seriously and pushed up that priority list, where it's actively being planned into these wider plans and strategies. As we're discussing much more on a campaign basis, or a year-long view, for example. So it doesn't surprise me in terms of the numbers and the percentages there, but I also think that comes back to as well the challenges around how do we attribute this? How do we set up a structured program in a way that we can measure the outcomes from it? And that's all stuff that we'll get into shortly, I'm sure. But that's certainly kind of where my head is at.
And that makes perfect sense to me. I mean, there's a kind of there's a mismatch between, inherently, these awards are designed to reflect campaigns over a defined period of time with a specific set of objectives, whereas I suspect sometimes what you're doing is you're helping people, as you say, drive a cultural shift within a team, within an organisation, trying to get people to do that over a longer period of time, not without objectives, clearly with objectives, but perhaps not necessarily aligned to those shorter term or medium term sales objectives. So sometimes there's a little bit of a mismatch in terms of what we're trying to reflect here, and I suspect that possibly one of the reasons why it's not pulling through as much as it might be. Is that fair?
Yeah, I also think you want it to be a longer term approach, right? That's where you see the most from it. So I think actually if you're only doing it as a short term campaign led initiative where you're asking your team or employees to amplify specific campaign led content, I personally probably wouldn't even identify that as advocacy. I would identify that as distribution. And that is something that's quite different to empowering proper, employee advocacy across the team, where you've got a bit more of a cultural shift, and you've got, these are the parts that everyone's playing in this. These are the benefits to everybody, and actually, these are the longer term outcomes that we can achieve in a measurable way.
Okay, yeah, it's the two things are aligned, but they're not necessarily talking. They're not apples and pears, but they're possibly different. They're different flavours of a similar theme. So I what you were saying. For me, I think what good looks like, I would just suggest, is actually empowering, having the baseline level of empowerment of employees to spread that message, and then being able to deploy them in tactical campaigns as required. That's the kind of belt and braces solution I would hope or suggest, maybe. But anyway, look, before we get further into this, let's talk about some things that we found in terms of, we're looking at this, the analysis here. And there are 5 things that we, kind of key things which we should pull out in the analysis. And the first one was, as we teased earlier on, the kind of dominance of LinkedIn within this particular deployment, this facet of marketing. And if you're like you and I, Robyn, we're on LinkedIn an awful lot, it's probably not surprising, but maybe other people less so, So on the surface, it might seem obvious that LinkedIn's dominant, but there are significant implications if you think about it. I mean, virtually every employee advocacy campaign in our analysis uses LinkedIn as the primary or sole channel for employee content, whether that's the employees posting original content, sharing campaign assets, or amplifying brand posts through personal profiles. No other platform comes close. It's probably to do with the structural nature of the platforms as they are. What's interesting is that LinkedIn is almost never the strategic rationale. The underlying logic is about reach into personal networks, peer-to-peer credibility, or cost efficiency versus paid media. One campaign we could see, which is by an engineering firm called LTTS, generated over 10 million organic impressions at a total program cost of $2,000, modeling that against the equivalent paid LinkedIn spend would have cost between $5,000 and $80,000, right? So it's a dramatic leap. And the spread of categories where employee advocacy is broader than you'd expect. I mean, yes, obviously brand initiatives are the most common home, but employee advocacy also shows up in demand generation, ABM, thought leadership, international campaigns. It's not just a brand or employee tool anymore, which I think is a really, really good thing. So, Robyn, what do you think about LinkedIn's dominance in employee advocacy being almost total? Is that concentration a sign of where the B2B audience actually is, or is the discipline failing to explore other means, other channels at their disposal, or is it perhaps a lack of imagination potentially on the part of some of the people designing these campaigns?
Not at all. I think as everybody defaults to LinkedIn, and when we come to B2B, and I think ultimately that dominance is definitely how to phrase it, it's definitely inflated by the absence of the capability elsewhere. You kind of alluded to it just then around the structural nature of LinkedIn specifically, and it is the only place where you get that professional identity. You've got the network structure, you've got some level of intent data that's very limited. We'll talk about that later, and algorithms, and they all work well together to give us what we need out of it. To some extent. There are, of course, other platforms. There's Instagram, TikTok. We're not discounting those at all for the use of B2B campaigns. And there are a lot of B2B campaigns which do phenomenally well across those platforms, but they don't have access to things like job roles, employment history, industry context, company connections, things like that give us those B2B signals that we're looking for when we're potentially measuring intent, or that we're trying to build trust with our customers. And so it's really difficult when the algorithm, for example, in LinkedIn, it's basically your relationships typically decide who sees you. So you've got, say if I shared a post and you liked that post, it would be incredibly kind of you, thank you. But then your network would potentially see that content because you have almost indicated an interest in it. And so again, you've kind of got that trust-based foundation for that relationship. So that means that if you are, you've got a head of product, for example, that might naturally reach another head of product within their network. So you've got that kind of knock-on effect a little bit that LinkedIn can give us. So I don't think it's necessarily that people are lazy or anything like that when they're thinking about how to use different platforms, but I do think that LinkedIn is set up in a way that gives us what we need in a B2B capacity to a certain extent.
Yeah, it's like, it's not so much as the only game in town, but it's just so much better designed for this specific purpose than the alternatives that are currently available.
Yeah, and I do think there's a bit of a risk that it's not a risk, I would say, to continue to use LinkedIn as your primary channel at all. But with the risk is if you are training teams in a way that only allows them to share on one platform, or maybe they're using a tool which is limited to LinkedIn, for example, then that's where the risk then is, because it's you want to create a fundamental cultural change within your team or train your team in a way that they can easily go, okay, we can use this platform, and it's how to, build trust with our audience in the right way. And that's probably the biggest risk. So definitely defaulting to LinkedIn isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I think how you set up and structurally set yourself up from the get-go, so in enabling and empowering teams to be able to pivot to other ways, that's probably the biggest thing.
There's a difference between platform training and outcome training, I suppose, or giving them that flexibility. I can completely see that, and I'm always surprised at how fast social platforms particularly go from not being very relevant, very peripheral, to all of a sudden people are talking about them like they're very, very powerful. I mean, TikTok is always one on the fringes, and then Reddit seems to have had a big year this year, doesn't it? So you never know. You look around in a few months' time and something else has become much more critical than we might have thought it was.
It's really funny as well. I do think that LinkedIn has this, because it's seen within organisations as something that is contributing towards the effort of building the brand of the company or the individual or connections within the industry. That's seen as a professional. Start that bit again. That's seen as almost a professional task within the working day, or a part of the working day that makes logical sense. But if someone is sat there, scrolling through TikTok or scrolling through Instagram, then that's probably going to be seen as procrastinating almost. So again, it's just that might be overlooked a little bit, but it is still, quite valid. LinkedIn usage is defensible. It's part of our habit, our daily rhythm. So therefore, it probably feels a bit more guilt-free. So it's easier to reach our buyers in that way because our buyers probably feel exactly the same.
Less likely to get distracted by cat videos as well. So there's lots of stuff for that. So Robyn,
although they are great,
before we move on from this. Although they are great. Everyone has a cat video. Just before we move on from this point, though, just one quick final follow-up question is that, we're seeing, as we hinted there, we're seeing employee advocacy showing up in demand generation ABM, which is great. It's not just brand campaigns. What does this tell you about how practitioners are beginning to think about the commercial potential of employee advocates?
Yeah, so I think historically, I think we've always kind of seen employee advocacy sit more as a brand activity or employer brand, but recently it has, as you say, been used a bit more heavily within ABM strategies or demand gen and what that looks like, particularly from a sales perspective. And I think when you think about ABM, you do typically ask things like, who are our target audience? What do they care about? How can we put messaging in front of them that they're going to trust? Or how can we make that really personal to them? And so now when you look at that in an employee advocacy perspective, that looks like, okay, which experts do we need to kind of put in front of our buyers to give them the right information that they're looking for? Which roles are naturally going to build that trust with our buyers and, amplify our messaging, but also which experts would a prospect listen to as well, and more than a sales rep. I was in a workshop, I was leading a workshop recently, and we had all different kinds of roles within the room, and one of the sales professionals was like, actually when the subject matter experts posts, then our job is made so much easier. It's so much easier to have those conversations because we then know that the prospect already trusts us. They've been following our subject matter expert for a long period of time. And now our job becomes, okay, how can we fill in those gaps? So it's really important to think about this strategically. And as you say, which accounts are we trying to connect with? Can we connect with the decision makers? Okay, now that we're connected with them, how can we put content in front of them from the right people? And it's thought about much more strategically, which is great. And so I think there's a lot more power to it when we think about that more of an ABM lens and demand gen lens, certainly. So it's nice. It's nice to be, see it being used as a tactic throughout the funnel, which is great.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's all that part of maturity, I think. So we talked about brand. We've got the second kind of finding from this analysis is what we're calling the brand moment trigger. So this is when employee advocacy gets deployed, and the pattern is quite clear. Around 70% of employee amplify campaigns in our analysis. So this is the amplifiers are the people who are not brought in because of their thought leadership nous, as it were, or their savvy, or their positioning around that. They're brought in as amplifiers rather than thought leaders, so 70% of employee amplify campaigns were triggered by specific brand moments, a rebrand, a product launch, or a significant organisation event. Companies like Block, LTTS, MFL Direct, DSMI, Soldo, all of these companies within the awards analysis deploy employee advocacy in the context of articulating a brand challenge to the outside world. And there is a compelling logic to this, right? A rebrand creates a ready-made narrative that requires organizational buy-in to succeed, and employee voices are particularly powerful when a brand is signaling something that has genuinely changed from the inside out. But the corollary is that most employee advocacy is episodic rather than always on. It's a launch mechanic, not a standing capability. For example, LTTS's brand ambassador program is the clearest exception, explicitly designed as a self-sustaining community that outlasts any single campaign, but that's very much the minority. So I guess, Robyn, the question to you is, most employee advocacy in our data is activated around specific brand moments rather than deployed as always on campaigns. Is that a reasonable starting point, or does it mean that we're not really recognising the potential of this discipline and we're kind of underselling it in terms of its potential?
Yes, I think it is. I think it's a natural starting point, as you say, for a lot of companies to think, actually, how can we bring this into, as you mentioned, a product launch, a new rebrand, whatever it might be. And sometimes that might be the catalyst to thinking about this. Okay, actually, we should probably do this longer term. So however companies sometimes or teams get there, great. But I do believe that from the conversations I certainly have, there'll be people, prospects that I'll be having conversations with, and they'll say, actually, we really want to go ahead with this. Let's start, but we're going to start it just before the rebrand because that makes sense. We can tie it all in together. But actually, it really should be treated as a marathon. It's not a sprint. Building trust is not an overnight thing. You need to steadily solidify your position, and you would do that with your brand, for example, but you need to also do that with the experts on your team and help them. So it's not just about, okay, how can we give them content that's going to push out and build trust with our buyers, but it's also getting them to the point where they feel confident, they recognize which topics they should be talking about, they have a clear path in, okay, these are the key people that we're trying to speak to. This is what the topics that I care about. This is the topics that are important to the effort of the company. And now we build the confidence to, okay, let's get ourselves out there, and slowly finding that rhythm with posting content authentically and, in a way that makes sense to the audience. So I think companies sometimes choose to do, as you said, the kind of episodic advocacy because it is, it feels a bit easier. Sometimes it's, you control the message. You've got very simple, this is our campaign. This is the messaging that we would love you to post. Off you go. So you control the message, you control the timing, and ultimately probably feels like you control that risk a lot more. But it doesn't always mean that it's effective. So if you have it as a much more always on advocacy approach, that trust effectively has already been built with their audience, and that's been built over a much longer period of time. So when you have these campaign moments, whether it be a rebrand, a launch, whatever it might be, then you've already kind of put in the groundwork. And so that will shorten that potential sales cycle and have much more impact at that point. So you've already done the groundwork in terms of training and coaching your team and, building that capability around them and changing that culture within the team so that they, ultimately that advocacy effort is much more effective when it's needed. So I think that, as you said, the organizations who treat this much more as a culture as opposed to this is an episodic, we're going to just launch this alongside and we just hope that we can get at least one or two posts out of the team, I think they'll see much more from this as an effort.
So that's fantastic. And what I'm taking is, if you've got a brand moment that catalyzes you to thinking about employee advocacy. That's not a bad thing, right? But it's a wasted opportunity if you then stop when the brand moment has ended. It's about because then you're losing all the good work and you're losing the opportunity to do good stuff in the future.
Absolutely, yeah, and we see it time and time again with the teams that we support. It takes a while to get to the point where they feel confident and they're on their way in posting content regularly and finding that rhythm and whatnot. But then when you have that, you can see not only do they get kind of inbound opportunities coming to them, which they're like, oh, I never thought this could happen if they're in sales, for example, but also you're set up so when you do have these moments and you check in with the team and go, right, what have we got coming up for the next quarter? Oh, we've got this that we want to be doing. Okay, so how can we activate the right people in the team to say, okay, let's seed this into your message in an authentic way, and they want to amplify it, something that's important to them and they're invested in as well. So, but they do that in their own way and in a way that they know adds value to their audience, as opposed to a scripted post that probably feels very disingenuous.
Absolutely. Okay. Fascinating. I'm really enjoying your insights, Robyn. And my only frustration is I've got a lot of more questions to get through, so I can move on faster than I might otherwise like. So
no worries.
The third finding that we had from looking at the B2B Marketing Awards entries was we called inside-out sequencing, and this is one that I find particularly interesting because it reframes internal communications as strategic marketing capability rather than support function. So this is hopefully music to your ears. I'll find out in a moment if that's true. Several of the strongest campaigns in our analysis describe an explicit sequencing. Activate employees internally before anything goes out external. Kelly OCG ran EMEA office parties featuring their creative before any public activation. MFL Direct plastered campaign materials across the headquarters. LTTS ran brand cafes across 7 regional campuses for there was any media spend, and Staff-Based launched their campaign, their own annual internal event. Kelly OCG's framing of this is striking. They describe their employees as our first media channel, and this reframes the internal launch not just as a soft people initiative, but as the opening move in the campaign strategy that moves forward from there. And the most extreme version of this logic comes from a campaign called Flight NBS 2025. Snappy title that, which is for Empower Business Solutions. That's used VR. I've used a VR experience to help over 1,000 employees to connect with a brand refresh. 78% of employees rated their brand connection at 8 or above from the experience, compared to 57% before. So the external advocacy came as a byproduct of genuine internal conviction and connection. I mean, I guess, Robyn, having talked to you earlier on, you'd probably regard this as a hygiene factor, right? You need to get your employees briefed. If you're going to use them, get them briefed and lined up first. You can't do it 6 months or 3 months down the line. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And it's nice. It's nice to see, it's reframing that internal communication as, being first and foremost most important, and getting the buy-in from the team as well, as you said. So, I think ultimately if your team genuinely understand the story, what you're trying to achieve, and how they can potentially play a role in that if they want to, it shouldn't be mandated. We should say that, then if they're believing it, then they're excited for it, then they're more likely to want to play that role in it and to want to be part of that effort. So if the opposite occurs and they don't really understand and they're just being asked to post, maybe scripted posts, or there's a tool that has these kind of AI generated posts as part of it, or whatever that looks like, then sometimes you'll get that low engagement. You'll get those templated posts that, quite frankly, probably won't do the same job in earning trust with the audiences, or you'll just get silence and you won't get anybody posting whatsoever, and certainly not for a long period anyway. So that culture is really important. So it's great. I think that bringing that employee experience ultimately kind of sets the foundation for a great brand experience overall, and that ultimately affects the buyer experience at the other end. So yes, that's definitely important.
Yeah, I don't see how you could legitimately in today's world do it without getting people on board first, because, as you say, at worst, it just looks disjointed, and you're actually going to get really cynical activities. And why wouldn't you get your employees lined up? Because I guess the reality is that sometimes people still don't. So
it's interesting as well. I think a lot of people forget that, these aren't ad units. These are actual people that have got their own, family, friends, and peers within their networks, and they want to put out content that they feel proud of, they believe in. This isn't, you can't expect them to share stuff that they feel is disingenuous or not authentic to them as individuals as well. So it's really important to treat those experts with the respect that they deserve, and say, actually, we believe in this, and we would love you to also believe in it, and bring them along that journey with you, so that they can choose whether they want to get involved, and if they do, great, wrap around them and give them everything they need to do that really well.
Okay, fantastic. Well, that's great. So the fourth finding, we were starting to get into the really important bit, which is the commercial stuff here. So the fourth finding we've identified here is called the commercial. Alex, you're itching to get into this as well. The commercial. We're calling this a commercial measurement gap. So finding 4 is about measurement, and it reveals a significant gap between the ambition of employee advocacy and accountability. And let's face it, it wouldn't be the first time, right, that B2B marketers haven't quite been as aligned around accountability and ROI as they might have wanted or aspired to have been. So even in campaigns that are otherwise highly commercially rigorous, with clear pipeline attribution, AAR, ROI figures, the employee advocacy component is always reported in reach and volume terms: number of posts, number of ambassadors, organic impressions generated. Explio's hashtag SAP NAV campaign. Take Explio's hashtags SAP NAV campaign, which generated 44.4 million in pipelines and 63-1 ROI. It includes employee advocacy as an explicit component, but the contribution of advocacy to those numbers is never isolated or quantified. This pattern repeats across the data set. The LTTCS brand ambassador program is the most rigorous exception. They tracked post volume and engagement rates, identified which story themes resonated most, and explicitly modeled their organic reach against equivalent paid CPM models. It's not full commercial attribution, but it establishes an efficiency case, and the entire program cost $2,000. So, Robyn, question to you then is, even in highly commercially accountable campaigns, the employee advocacy component is typically measured in reach impressions, not revenue. Why do you think that gap exists, and what would it take to close it?
Yes, the big $1 million question. Look, ultimately, it's really difficult, right? We are, I think nobody has got this kind of the gold standard completely right. It's just a very, very difficult challenge to solve. Ultimately, I think it's because when we look historically at that employee advocacy, as I said before, it's very much been viewed almost as a distribution. We've got a post that we would love you all to share. Feel free to tweak it if you want to, but we'd love to get it out the door, right? So it's very much just distributing that message. And also it's been very focused historically on the brand account, as opposed to actually the experts and empowering them as well. And we talked a little bit around LinkedIn and what that looks like as a dominance within employee advocacy as a strategy. And LinkedIn is also, it's quite difficult to measure anything deeper at scale. It ultimately really is, because their metrics are very much focused around impressions, likes, comments, reposts, profile views, all of this sort of stuff. But none of this really tells us about whether the right account saw that piece of content, or whether influence was created inside a deal, or whether multiple decision makers potentially liked a piece of content or viewed your profile off the back of it, whether conversations were opened up, all of these things. So it's really difficult to piece those, all the puzzle pieces together and join the dots, so to speak. But what you can do is, there's potential. It's a very manual effort at the moment, and it's effectively training the team. And this goes back to, as I said before, that coaching and training piece. To how can you train your team to say, okay, we're going to try and do what we can. We can't measure everything, but why don't we apply UTMs to any links that we share, so we can see where that's coming from and what traffic is coming through as a result of that. But we also encourage them, whenever LinkedIn content, for example, is referenced in a sales conversation, is that logged in the CRM, for example? Again, a very manual effort, but where we can pick up these things and measure them as best we can, then great. But it also shouldn't just stop there. It should be, okay, how can we also note additional exposure opportunities? For example, there might be 3 people who are part of a cohort program that have been invited on stages or to talk on podcasts like this, right? And that shouldn't be ignored either. So all of these different ways in showing that influence is being created, it's being built with the right people, and you're building momentum with those conversations should all be tracked as much as we possibly can, and that goes back to, telling the team, explaining to the team, this is part of the effort, and actually we would love you to highlight if you do have these opportunities or messages pop up.
Okay, and that's fantastic. So much in what you said there, but I want to just drill down a little bit further, because you also, before we went live, we were talking about the CPM, for example, and LTTS is an example where they model their organic reach against paid CPM equivalents as a way of making a commercial case. Am I right in thinking, what do you think about that? Is that a sensible thing to do, or are you a fan of that approach?
Look, I think highlighting reach is definitely a start, and there is a phenomenal reach that you can have by leveraging the experts on your team and their networks. But for me, particularly for when you look at it as CPM equivalent for paid activity, that definitely, I don't know, it kind of treats employees like a cheaper version of display advertising, almost like ad units, which I think it's very, very different. They're not, billboards or advertising spaces. They are experts. They're kind of problem solvers. They can have those conversations with your ICP and your audience. So it's very, very different in that respect. But also paid media, when you look at a CPM, for example, that guarantees targeting. Organic doesn't. So, and there are so many nuances to engagement, for example. If you get engagement on a post, there's no guarantee that they are your ICP. There's no guarantee that these are people that you're trying to influence or trying to build relationships with. So it's very difficult to compare those two. I don't think they're the same. But so for me, it's also encouraging if they're kind of pitching that to, a decision maker within their team, is to say, this is why we should be doing advocacy, because the reach is really high, and comparing it to a CPM. That's purely looking at a volume metric. So it doesn't actually take into consideration the qualitative powerful impact that advocacy can have in terms of, do you have buyers that are saving down your posts? Do you have inbound conversations or questions from people within your ICP? Are you getting connection requests from a decision maker who you've been trying to speak to for a long time? All of these things, and so should be considered. So it's a very, very different in terms of what those two things mean. And so I think it should be more of a focus on, this is a much more strategic effort that we can make in terms of building longer term influence and getting that quality of interaction as opposed to the quantity.
Yeah, I think it's a very, very nuanced perspective you give in there, and I think it's a fantastic response. I guess you give some credit to the company concerned with this, because they did use it. It did, and they felt it did build a justification, and they're better than them not using it at all. And it's a creative workaround. But I guess what you're saying, it's not necessarily the most robust. You're going to get a full picture by doing it that way.
Yeah, and absolutely. And look, hats off to anyone who's really rolling this out as a structured program, because it's a really difficult thing to actively measure and to attribute towards a larger effort, and to justify that as an investment, right? As you said. So and I think that reach definitely shouldn't be underestimated. I just think, there's definitely just a few more nuances on how we could probably reposition that to say, actually, this is the quality of the influence that we're able to create off the back of it, as opposed to just purely looking at that impression volume metric.
Okay, fantastic. All right. So we've gone 4 of our 5 points. The last one we've got here is everyone's favourite B2B marketing challenge. It's sales and marketing convergence or alignment, or in this case, we're going to say it's convergence. So we all know this is the perennial challenge of B2B marketing, and as long as humans are involved, it will be a challenge, probably even after that as well. We found that where employee advocacy is starting to sit in the organisation, it's not necessarily where you might expect. Several campaigns describe employee advocacy performing as a dual function, generating external reach while simultaneously equipping sales teams with better prospect conversations. The Access Group, for example, trained 400 sales and business development employees through a learning management system so they could better conversations with HR prospects. The campaign content went to the sales team first and then to market. Explio produced a dedicated seller kits alongside employee advocacy kits as parallel outfits parallel outputs from the same content strategy. One advanced created both simultaneously, treating employee advocacy networks as an ABM targeting layer and sales converged conversations as a downstream activation. Soldo's framing is the most explicit. All content featured the employee advocacy mechanic, including sales enablement. Nothing went to market without a call to action and content program. So, Robyn, I mean, this is kind of engaging this with the kind of sharp end of B2B marketing, the revenue generation aspect. When employee advocacy starts functioning as a sales preparation, equipping people for better prospect conversations as well as brand application, does it change the discipline fundamentally, or is it just a natural evolution?
I think, it only, affects the... if you look at authenticity, for example, I think it only undermines that if you script people. I think sales and marketing, there's, as you say, it's the age-old argument. How can we align them better and bring them together? And so actually, how can we get multiple different experts across the team wrapping around the customer, giving different points of view, different perspectives, or necessarily different points of view, but different perspectives on their problems in a helpful way. And so I think if you can empower the team in a way to share that, then it enhances that authenticity piece as opposed to actually taking away from it and undermining it. So yeah, I think there's always going to be an element of commercial intent. I think when you look at sales professionals, their primary objective is to get those opportunities across the line and convert the deals. But then you also get other people across the team, and how can they best support them in a way that is valuable. So and pertinent to their particular role. So it might be subject matter experts, for example, sharing commentary on a particular upcoming piece of legislation, for example, and how this might affect their customers or clients and what they can do about it. It's being valuable. And so I think if everybody can do that in a way that is right, then and helps the sales conversations at the end of it and ultimately speeds up that sales process because that trust already exists, then that's great. But I think it's empowering the team as opposed to mandating them and forcing them to show up. And that's what keeps that authenticity to that and always keeping that customer at the forefront.
Okay, fantastic. I mean, we covered so much ground today, Robyn. Your insight has been brilliant today to really help unpack all this. It's an area that I'm just starting to get my head around, and I think it's fascinating. It's such a powerful channel, but there's so many challenges. Just a closing question here, and we've talked about so many aspects of this where employee advocacy is at the moment. Where do you think we are in terms of the state of it as a kind of a real valuable tool in the kind of the armory that B2B marketing and B2B brands have got to face? What do you think it says about the state of employee advocacy right now?
Yeah, I think it's growing as teams are recognizing how valuable this can be and how impactful and powerful this can be as part of a wider strategy. So it's fantastic. We've talked through some brilliant examples here today already. And so it's great to see more and more companies adopting this and testing it out, experimenting. And as you say, how can we justify that spend? How can we, continue the effort and expand that program even further? But yeah, I think that will only grow, which in turn also creates a bit of challenge in terms of the noisiness of like LinkedIn, for example. It's already becoming quite noisy. And so that for me is then looking at, okay, well, how, if everybody starts to do this, or most companies start to do this in the next couple of years, how can you then stand out? How can you differentiate yourself in a really crowded market? And so that creativity piece will be really key in how you can really deeply understand your customers' problems and pain points, and how you can activate your team in a way that promotes that creativity and doesn't always rely on those kind of AI generated posts and things like that as a way to connect, because that's how you'll stand out and win ultimately.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. I've really enjoyed talking to you about this today. So much great advice in this. And I'll do an article as well on LinkedIn. So check that out. Because obviously we're all using LinkedIn, as we discovered earlier on. So do check that out as well as part of this. So Robyn, thanks so much for joining us today. I've really enjoyed having you on.
Thank you so much for having me. It was always wonderful to chat. So yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Marketing has a diversity problem, and the industry knows it, but most people aren't doing much about it. The Marketing Skills Trust is a charity that's actually trying to fix it. They fund outreach programs, apprenticeships, training events and mentoring, all aimed at getting people into marketing careers who wouldn't otherwise find their way in. I spoke to the chairman, Martin Troutman, and what struck me most was this: curiosity, creativity and storytelling, the traits that make a great marketer, have nothing to do with what school you went to, but too often the industry acts like they do. As Martin put it, the greater the diversity in the room, the greater the ideas that come out of it. Simple, obvious, and yet still not happening enough. This episode is part of Podcastathon, a community initiative shining light on charities in our industry. The full episode's out now. There's a link in the caption. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next.